It's been a while since I've done this. I really enjoy teaching, and it's been a while. And in thinking about this, some things happened. I've had a lot of tough times the last few months. But about 2 months ago, around the time of my wife's memorial service, there were some things going on that really disturbed me. And I was thinking, this is really Pharisaical behavior. And it was pretty upsetting to me. And so I started thinking about Pharisaical. Do I even know what that means? And so I started digging into things, and Pharisaical is an adjective that means similar to the Pharisees. Okay? And it really is talking about, it's describing people who are hypocritical and or very self-righteous. So some things were going on. I don't want to get into those things at all. But what I did was I started. What's that?
Your microphone is tucked under your lapel, so it's going to be muffled. I know your kids, your grandkids all want to hear you, so.
I have a lot of fans.
On there, the middle, that would be the best place. Yeah.
I have a lot of fans outside the area. It's my evangelism. That's how I do. Anyway, so I started thinking a lot about the Pharisees. What do I really know? What do I really know about the Pharisees? I mean, who were they? Where did they come from? You know, what did they believe? And that, as I got into that, I started thinking about Jewish sects, groups, and that existed around the time of the Christ. And I started thinking, well, you know, why did Jesus picked on the Pharisees a lot? Yeah. Scribes and the Pharisees, but the Pharisees more than anybody. And so I started studying that stuff, and those of you who know me know I'm a history nerd. So as I started digging into this stuff, man, I just got more and more excited about it. Nobody gets excited about history as much as me. Well, maybe the pastor. He gets excited about that stuff too. So I thought, man, I need to share this. And the pastor had asked me if I was ready to do some teaching again. So I said, oh, this is a great topic. So what I'm going to do for the next 2 weeks, it's kind of two sections. The first part today, I'm going to talk about this big historical setting, kind of put it in perspective, and then next week we'll dig into the sects and what they believed and their history and stuff in a little more detail. So let's open with a little word of prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for everything that you provide for us, Lord. Thank you for this group. Thank you for the opportunity to get together in fellowship. May this information that I want to share with people help us better understand your word and make us hungry to learn more. I just ask all this in Jesus' name. Okay, so what I've titled this is Sadducees, Pharisees, and Others, History, Beliefs, and Practices, but we are really, if this works, like I said, for the next 2 weeks, we're going to talk about this, but today we're going to focus on the history. So that's more of what we're going to really delve into in more depth, and then next week we'll get into about the sects. But hopefully, I think you really need to understand what was going on during this period to really understand how they came about, what they believed, and how things evolved. Okay, so we're going to do a historical perspective of it. I'm going to talk about some major things: the Alexandrian Empire, the Maccabean or the Hasmonean dynasty, and the Roman dynasty. That stuff all sets the stage for these groups. Okay, so the world of Israel and the Palestine that Jesus entered to was intensely religious. I mean, their beliefs and practices and institutions was all very much centered, rooted around the biblical tradition. So it was just very, very religious and traditional. As we'll see, those things kind of, I don't want to say fall apart, but there's a lot of issues with that. One of the things that really affected Israel was all its persecution over time, invasions, exiles, foreign rule, all those things kind of are going to help us build a good picture of what happened at that time. Jesus taught that people would often address the teachings and traditions of these different factions. So these factions came into being, and Jesus felt that these factions, what they believed, their traditions, was influencing things and really taking them away from what God intended for the people. Okay, so we're going to talk about this about 500-year period from about 400 BC through about 100 AD, because the period of time that I'm going to talk about here. So first we have the intertestamental period, which is the period between the New and the Old Testament. It's called the silent years, except it's silent years because God didn't speak prophetically through anybody that wrote anything canonical, but there's actually a lot of stuff that was going on that I think God's hand was heavily at work during that period. So we're gonna talk about that a little bit. So the 100 years after the intertestamental period, which is the Roman rule, so from about the late BC to about, I'm going to go to about 70 AD to the destruction of the temple. Okay, so Jews were under the control of the Persians before this. At the time of the end of the Old Testament, the Persian Empire controlled Israel, Palestine. Before that was the Babylonians. So these nations had kind of come out of the east. But at the end of that period of the Old Testament period, the beginning of the intertestamental period, this power came out of the west, and that was the Greeks. Alexander the Great. He defeated the Persian Empire, and we're going to talk quite a bit more about Alexander, but his dynasty kind of ruled over Israel, him and his successors, for over 150 years. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that. We're going to talk about how the Jews revolted. And it happened over a period of time with the Greeks and what was going on. And we'll learn about a guy named Judas Maccabeus and what happened at that time. And then followed by, in about 63 BC, Rome invades Israel, captures Jerusalem, beginning of the Roman Empire. Okay? Now, of course, the Roman Empire, we know that's the group that taxed and controlled the Jews and led to the crucifixion of the Messiah. So I want to kind of put a little perspective here. Got my pointer. I had a laser pointer, but I can't find it. Anyway, this is kind of the biblical time from the beginning in Genesis. Come tonight. We'll be talking about Genesis tonight, another one of my favorite topics. And so this is God's timeline. So we're covering this period right here, the intertestamental period, Jesus' time, and the early Roman Empire. So that's what we're doing. If you remember other talks I had when I talked more about archaeology and those kind of things, I kind of have this table which was showing, what archaeologists and historians kind of label these periods, what the dates were, what some of the biblical time. So we're in this area right in here. Intertestamental period started in here and in that period. So that just kind of put it into a bit of perspective. Okay, so Alexander the Great, he was born in 356 BC, lived for 33 years. At age 20, his dad, Philip, was assassinated, and he became the king of Macedonia. So he was 20 years old. He had been taught by some of the greatest Greek scholars. This brilliant man, a brilliant strategist, and he amassed an army of, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll hold that for a second, because I really wanted to talk about how we're going to talk about this empire. He created it. He dies. His empire gets divided between his four top advisors. We're going to primarily look at two of those generals, Ptolemaise and Seleucid, and they controlled Israel for the majority of the Alexandrian Empire. Some key things that happened there was the Hellenization, the Greekizing of basically all the known world, certainly Israel and Palestine. So at that time, as part of this Hellenization, that the Septuagint, we've heard about the Septuagint, early translation of the Bible into Greek, started about 255 BC. That was really just, I mean, initially they just did the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. It was for the library in Alexandria, Egypt. And they wanted Greek people to be able to read this. And by this time, Greek was accepted as one of the major language of the time. So that's kind of significant. The Septuagint actually gets developed over 100, 150 years. There's no one thing. There's a lot of iterations, a lot of authors. Also, at that time, there was something that was discovered many years ago, but it's called the Rosetta Stone. You've heard of that? Mm-hmm. Now, the significance of the Rosetta Stone is this, that it was actually a decree by one of the Ptolemies in Egypt, which probably had something to do. Since then, we've discovered several other stones like this. But the key was that they discovered sometime later that this had writing in 3 different languages, 3 different presentations maybe. They had Greek hieroglyphics. They had, I want to say demonic, it's not demonic, it's demotic, I think, which was an Egyptian script. That was on there, and then Greek. During the last couple hundred years, they actually were able to decipher that, and that led us to be able to read more stuff that's out there in archaeology. You know, I've talked about archaeology quite a bit in the past. So after the Alexandrian Empire, the Maccabees, or the Hasmonean dynasty happens, and that's Jewish rule, which was the Jews ruled Palestine, Israel, for about 100 years. First time in 400 years that they had self-ruled. So that happened 164 to 63 BC. Then the Roman Empire came in, and I say that the Roman Empire, we're not talking about the Roman Republic, we're talking about the Roman Empire, and I'll touch on that just a little bit later. But you know, Pompey conquered Israel in 63 BC. The Roman emperor and the Senate put Herod the Great in as king of Judah. Jesus is born at that time. Of course, he's crucified, died, and buried, and resurrected, and the temple was destroyed. So that's kind of a quick overview of that. To talk a little bit more about what happened, I covered on the Alexandrian Empire because Alexander took over the Macedonian kingdom at age 20, very young. He amassed a big army, 140,000, they say, men, and he set out to conquer. He first conquered coastal areas around the Mediterranean. He's known for driving his men. The reason he was so successful, he was fast. They moved in fast and quick. And if you remember, I think a year or two ago, I talked about Tyre and the prophecies related to Tyre, and that was one of the prophecies that was made was about Tyre, and it's about part of Alexander's conquest of that part of the world. He ended up capturing all of what was the Medo-Persian Empire, went a little farther into India. So it's larger than the Persian Empire was. Of course, he had Macedonia and Greece, that area, which was not under Persian rule before. Okay, but at age 33 he dies. He's actually, we don't know why he dies. I've read a bunch of stuff and different things. I don't know why he died. Died of natural causes, who knows? But we do know they killed his wife and his son, who would have been his successors. And they divided the empire into between four of his advisors or generals. And we'll be talking about that a little bit more. So just to give you an example here. So this is what Alexander did. So he started out over here, captured some of this area, and then he moved. Whew. By the time he got here, they quit expanding because his men were tired. And they was like near revolt. They wanted to go home. And that kind of stopped his conquest. I think he would have kept driving them. But now, what happened after that is it gets divided, and there's a Ptolemaise, Seleucid part, and then the other generals had some of the more populated but sparser areas, and we're not going to really talk about that. We're going to really focus on these two things, because right here in the middle is Israel, Palestine, right here in the middle, and that's what we will try to. What did I do? I hit return. Okay, so the Ptolemies controlled that area that I was showing. I'll get back to the map in a minute, but so they controlled that area of Palestine. So they're down here and they control this area. There's battles going on all the time. These guys are always fighting for control. But for 100 or so years, they were in charge. Some significant things here, and these things really start building why these sects and groups came into being. So under the Ptolemaic rule, their emphasis was really on taxing the people they conquered, right? And they pretty much were open to religious beliefs. So they taxed them, they controlled their agriculture, their commerce basically was controlled very tightly, but they were pretty loose about religious beliefs. So the Jews continued their Jewish practices. One of the significant things that happened at this time was they decided that the high priest would be the mediator between the Ptolemies and the Jews. Okay, so on this interface. That really marked the first politicalization of the high priest's position. Okay, so under the Ptolemies, the Greek culture influence known as Hellenization began to make its way. So Greek was the common language at this time now for the whole empire, and Greek culture was spread. So the Jews were starting to embrace this Greek culture, including the language. So the Seleucids were the other group, other big group. They had a massive amount of territory. In some ways they were very, very aggressive. I mean, Seleucid, one of the generals, he tried to take more of India. They battles with India, and just the interesting side to it. So they were battling, and they got a treaty with the particular king of India, and the treaty, he stopped his conquest in exchange for 500 elephants. These were war machines, elephants. And so he very much used these elephants later in his conquest. He was powerful. So he eventually, or that dynasty eventually took control of Israel, Palestine, okay? One of the things, so there was a whole, during this, I'm talking about this dynasties because there was just a whole lineage of kings in these various areas, rulers. So one of them was Antiochus the Fourth, who ruled from 175 to 133, okay? So as the Seleucids took over, they really started pushing this Hellenization. It wasn't just what they tried to do. It started becoming compulsive, and they stripped the high priest of his position. They installed some illegitimate high priest who promoted Greek festivals and Greek games and all that stuff. Jerusalem really became like a Greek city. But the key there, one of the main things is they clamped down on Jewish rituals. So they outlawed circumcision, observing the Sabbath, food laws. They just flat outlawed them. I mean, if you practice those things, you got killed. I mean, it was extremely brutal. So I said Jerusalem became like all the other Greek cities. Antiochus placed, this is kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. He put a statue of Zeus in the temple. Then he forced sacrifices to Zeus. And
the Jewish temple, the one that
in the Jewish temple, yes, Zerubbabel's temple.
Yeah.
And well, let's talk. That kind of leads right in here to the Maccabees. So we'll just remember we're here at this temple things going on. But a lot of this history that I'm talking about, even though things are not specifically covered about this period in the Bible itself, there's a lot of prophecies that talk about these things that came to fruition. So especially in Daniel, and I did a talk once on Daniel and his prophecy and the statue and all that stuff. So there's a lot of stuff mentioned, but if you look at Josephus's Antiquities of the Jews, I have a copy of them if you're interested, and the apocryphal books of the Maccabees. Very interesting to read, especially First Maccabees. When you read them, you kind of know why they're not canon. But First Maccabees is really very good historical narrative about what was going on with the Jews at that time. So that's a lot of the data I got was from that area. So the faithful Jews at that time, they were opposed some of this Hellenization, and there was kind of this undercurrent going. And Antiochus IV, man, his overt acts just kind of was the straw that broke the camel's back. Not only did he put a statue of Zeus, and he did sacrifices, but he actually sacrificed a pig to Zeus, and he was forcing the Jewish priests to do these practices also. So that kind of was a straw that broke the camel's back. There was an elderly priest named Mattathias, and he had 5 sons. Yeah, 5 sons. And they will later be called the Maccabees. But he started a revolt against these. He started guerrilla warfare. It started when one of the Jewish priests was doing these sacrifices. He killed the Jewish priest and the king's officer that was there. He and his family ran to the hills and hid, and that kind of began this revolt of these faithful Jews. So he started this rebellion, and after he escaped, he was joined by a lot of other faithful Jews. So their numbers kind of swelled. And he died in 166, and his son Judas Maccabeus took command of the revolution. Okay, with his leadership, he attacked. They eventually took control of the temple. They cleansed the temple, rededicated the temple. That's the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah. Is the celebration of that event. Okay, so
What was the time frame when Herod the Great had because I know that Zerubbabel's temple was kind of destroyed and Herod the Great.
Well, Herod started his rebuilding of the temple in 20 A.D. For about 80 years. Till
This would be post this then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, this is Zerubbabel's temple still. It's later destroyed by also. Okay. Yeah.
Is that, what is that,
Epiphany?
Antigonus.
And
is that the fourth?
Antiochus Epiphanes, which means God manifested.
Okay. I always heard it in this.
Well, they all had other names too. I don't put them all in there because I have trouble with all these names. So it's like, yeah. Yeah. So in 64 in a battle, Antiochus is killed, and his successor is his son, Antiochus the Fifth. Had another name too. I'm not going to try to say that. But when he took over, he negotiated kind of some peace with these rebels, and that was good. But it didn't last too long before war continued between them. But for a while, they had they had at peace, and then a war broke out. And just a side note, I'm mentioning here that the rebels kind of sided with the Romans at that time and helped them. They became an ally and helped them overthrow the Seleucids. So I said Judas Maccabeus. He died in 161. He's succeeded by his brother Jonathan, who was the brother. There was 5 brothers. Remember this? They all kind of, 4 of them die in these battles. 1 kind of survives, but in spite of the fact that Judas Maccabeus, he was kind of he did a lot of the initial fighting, but he really didn't control this revolution for very long, but he is the one that's credited with all this stuff. So Maccabeus, or the Maccabeans, Maccabeus meant the hammer, and Judas the hammer, and so the whole family kind of takes on this name of Maccabee. So even the father and all the brothers, yeah. So that's the Maccabeans, were the father and the 4 sons, or 5 sons, excuse me. So looking at my notes, I'm trying to figure out what I haven't covered. Okay. So Jonathan was also a really good leader, and he made peace with then one of the Seleucid kings in about 153. Jonathan made himself the high priest, ousting the traditional priest, another significant thing that happened. And I think that has repercussions later when we discuss this. Within a few years, they gained their independence. And like I said, this is the first time they had been independent in over 4 centuries. So for this 100 years, there was Jewish self-rule. And I'm going to show you a picture of that in just a second. Jonathan was captured, and years later assassinated by one of the Seleucid generals. This stuff's going on. There's wars, battles going on continuously during this time. But Simon, his brother, one of his brothers, took over. So there's 3 brothers that have been in this line. Simon is really his descendants. Even though they're the Maccabees, but then that's when they take on this Hasmonean dynasty. That was the name of the. So all the rulers after that were all in his line, as far as the control of this period. He remains until his son John Hyrcanus, I guess. He's confirmed as high priest and ruler of Judah. These things are all very significant to the Jewish people. These are Jews but they're violating God's law already during this period of time. So he makes himself the high priest. There's several rulers after that time that continue the dynasty. So one of my talks before, I showed you current day Israel here. You know, there's the Gaza, there's the West Bank, there's the Golan Heights. So this is Israel today, including the disputed territories. And the red line shows that Israel, and this line is the Hasmonean or Maccabean area. So this is what Israel was when they were under their control. So pretty much about the same amount of territory. They didn't have certain areas.
The bottom part is the Dead Sea.
This is the Sinai Desert, and this the Dead Sea is over here.
That's the Red Sea Peninsula.
This is the peninsula. This is, yeah.
Oh, okay.
That's where they were.
Solomon had his port here. This is what he had. His main port for commerce was right there. It's one of his major ports. Anyway, so the Roman Empire is the next player. So it's going to end up with the Romans overthrowing that area. But leading up to that, so we had the Roman Empire started about 27 BC. The Roman Republic existed for maybe 500 years before that. It was a constitutional republic. We know about all that time. Everybody read Shakespeare, Julius Caesar. That's about that period of time. Well, how about Cleopatra, starring Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton? All about that period of time. There was tremendous things that happened in the Roman Empire that led to this. They became an empire, if you will, a dictatorship at that time, a very autocratic. I think one of the interesting things I've read was way back a few hundred years earlier when the Gauls, which was Northern Europe, attacked and sacked Rome. That led to the Roman Empire, no, the Roman Republic, deciding that they needed to arm themselves. And that's created the Roman professional army, which later does a lot of stuff. You might say that was the beginning of the fall. I don't know. But anyway, so Octavian or Julius Caesar, he took over the territory, expanded. Pompey, took over, controlled, conquered Jerusalem, and then Egypt. From that time on, they were under the Roman rule. And I like to point out something here that under the Greek Empire, the language, the culture was Greek. And you might say, well, that was their contribution. These things have become important when we're talking about spreading the gospel. Things got standardized. Things became possible. When the Romans came in, they were builders, especially Herod the Great. So they built roads, a lot of infrastructure, aqueducts. Those things are used by Paul in his missionary journeys later. So it's what they did to the world, had significant impact. So in 37, the Roman Senate and the emperor appointed Herod to be, Herod the Great to be the king of Judah. Herod was kind of an interesting character. He was not Jew, he was an Edomite, so a descendant of Esau. And the Jews didn't like him. They considered him a foreign dictator. But to win favor of the Jews, Herod did a lot. Well, Herod the Great was a builder. He loved to build. I mean, there's some. We're not touching on archaeology today, but there's a lot of archaeology around Herod the Great. I mean, he did a lot of building. There's a lot of stuff still in Egypt. In Israel that was the product of Herod the Great. But one of the things he did was he was trying to win favor of the Jews, and so he took to rebuilding the temple. that had been destroyed, Zerubbabel's temple. So he rebuilt it. He expanded the Temple Mount. He made it bigger and grander. The project went on long after his death. It took about 80 years, from about 20 BC to 60-some BC, AD, before it was completed. Let's see. In his later years, though, Herod, he was, in a lot of ways, he was a brilliant man, but he had some problems. He was always paranoid about somebody was going to take over. He actually killed his mother and one of his wives. He had 2 of his sons strangled. He did those things, of course. What's that?
He's a really nice guy.
He was a nice guy. He was just paranoid. So, as it says in the Gospel of Matthew, about how he heard about the King of the Jews was born, and he sent his men to kill all the children 2 and under. So, this kind of period kind of ends. Things are getting worse and worse with the Roman Empire. There's a lot of stuff going on. A couple of the sects we'll talk about involved in that. But I kind of end things with at 70 AD is when the temple is destroyed. And the reason I kind of end there is because in my looking at the 2 major sects that I'm going to talk about next week, they kind of seem to have disappeared when the destruction happened. So the Jewish sects that we're going to really talk about next week. So there's the scribes, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Essenes, the Zealots, the priests, and on and on and on. They all came about in different periods in history. Several of them appears to have started about 160, 150 BC. So right in the middle of this Alexandrian Empire. So that's when kind of things seem to have really started there. So we're going to talk about some of the events that I think led to the formation of some of these groups and how they disagreed. Many historical events. So next week we're going to dig deeper into the sects, their history, their practices, what they believed, and what Jesus thought about all this and what he said. And there's a lot there. So we're going to have a lot of meat. What I was trying to do here with this was just try and put all this in some kind of a historical perspective. I know it's a lot of data, but you just got to remember, we had the Persians in control. Then the Greeks took over. They got into it with the Jewish people, which led to a short time of the Jewish people actually being in charge of their own destiny, and then followed by the Romans. So that's kind of this period of time that all these other things are going to be happening that we'll talk about next week. Are there any questions?
Very good.
How am I on time? Good. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Bill. That was good.